Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros Masterclass on overcoming the top 7 sales challenges organizations are going to face in 2021. And this is sponsored by the team at ringDNA. I'm really excited about this content. This is stuff that is fresh and hot off the press. This isn't reheated old facts and cold takes from earlier in the year. This is some really good stuff. And I am personally excited to have both Jordan and Ryan joining us here today. And gentlemen, both welcome and thank you for taking some time. We do have a little bit of a tradition here with Modern Sales Pros. And before we jump into the great content that we have here today, we do want to learn a little bit more about each of you as panelists. So really one question for each of you, and Ryan, let's start with you. You're already getting some love for your background in the chat panel here. Ryan, any new skills or hobbies, tips or tricks or techniques that you've developed since the start of the pandemic?
Speaking of my background, and thank you, Alyssa or Elisa, this is obviously a Zoom background. I believe it's the Harvard Law Library, which is actually obscuring my real home office setup, which is my lovely garage. But the garage is also home to my new home gym setup. I'm like, fooling people as I get into weightlifting. I'm not a large human, and so I'm kind of struggling with it a little bit. But I got the whole setup. I got the squat rack to try to stay, a little bit healthy while I'm mostly at the computer all day long.
Well, I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the pandemic. You no longer know what shape or size anyone is. You could be 7 feet tall. We would never know. And then Jordan as well, first-time panelist. Same question for you. Anything new that you've developed, skills, tricks, hobbies, or otherwise since the start of the pandemic?
Yeah. I'm really impressed by the squat rack. A lot of people have done like a bench and a couple of dumbbells, but a full squat rack, that is a home gym setup. No gym for me. I actually sort of revisited something I did a lot when I was younger, a lot of construction and carpentry work. Over the pandemic, you can see I'm in a cabin right now. I bought a 1930s era cabin and relocated into the middle of the woods, and I'm manually fixing it up in my spare time. So doing a lot of carpentry work, which has been honestly a ton of fun. There's not a lot else to do right now other than carpentry work, to be honest. So it's been fun.
That's excellent. I think we've got two great sets of questions that we could ask these folks. In addition to learning about sales challenges, we talk about every day being leg day, and then sort of at home carpentry. I think this is great. All right, folks, we're gonna jump into this a little bit because we do have a relatively long program to run through today. So, Jordan, if you could just advance the slide one, please. And as I said earlier, thank you again to the team at ringDNA for the sponsorship. This content program wouldn't be possible without them. But today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. And those are individuals that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. We do that through bringing together speakers like Jordan and Ryan to talk about research about what real big challenges sales is going to face in 2021. We have a very amazing and robust online forum for you to ask all the questions that you have. And hopefully, when we all get jabbed, we can go back to having enjoyable in-person events as well. Community membership is free, and I would encourage those of you who aren't members to join and start contributing. But as I said before, today wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of ringDNA. I'm going to hand it off to Ryan to say just a few words about ringDNA. Ryan?
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who are not familiar, ringDNA, we're a technology company, revenue acceleration platform. And I'll tell you a short story, actually, how I ended up at ringDNA as a way to learn a little bit about what we do. I actually got into sales in a very, very odd way. My initial career was in journalism. I was a newspaper reporter. I stumbled into sales working at a previous company that I didn't even know I was taking a sales job. There was just a company I got really, really interested in. But the sales function came very naturally to me after a career trying to hunt people down who didn't want to talk to me. You got to build good relationships and be a really good communicator, right? So it turns out I really love sales and did well as an individual contributor and sort of made my way up to managing a team. And as soon as I became a manager team, I found that, I was spending way too much time trying to figure out and facilitate like a good process for my sellers to follow. And I was spending practically zero time actually coaching my sellers in the skills and the habits and the conversational techniques that really worked for me as a seller. And so I basically went out into the market because I was looking for tools to build a smarter, better process that would save time and put them and me in a position to actually, do what I loved, which was sales coaching. So enter ringDNA. We're a platform that addresses the sales operation in a number of ways, sales automation, but also some really exciting technology in conversation coaching as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's always great when an organization can bring on someone who is a practitioner and maybe even a user before, and then come on and really spread the gospel. I've had a chance to get to meet Jordan and Ryan in our prep session, but I'd like to give them each a chance to introduce themselves. And then just for our attendees, the chat panel is open, so feel free to weigh in. Let us know if there's any questions that you have or anything like that. But I'll hand it off to Ryan actually to introduce himself.
Yeah, so you just got a little bit of my background in introduction. Now at ringDNA, Senior Director North America Sales. So run the sales team over here and work really, really closely with my pal Jordan, who I'll let introduce himself.
Yeah, funny enough, I actually, the company that Ryan was at where he's talking about, he was struggling with that and trying to migrate over and figure out how to coach his team. I was actually the head of sales ops at that company. So we worked closely together for quite a long time and have known each other really, really closely. And part of the reason I came to ringDNA is exactly the same, passion about fixing the problem that Ryan just described. My background's a little bit different. I've actually not been an AE. I come from a legal background. I practiced law for a few years before sort of switching over into technology, and then just sort of made a logical shift into, well, logical in my mind, but to most people, not logical, from practicing law into sales operations and then revenue operations, and have honestly came to ringDNA for kind of the exact same reasons that Ryan laid out. I was sort of struggling as an ops leader with how do we enable reps and how do we break down silos between sales and marketing? How do we do these things with the technology that we have currently? And honestly, it's hard. ringDNA is doing a really good job of it, and that's what brought me here.
I think this is going to be awesome. And folks, so just two housekeeping notes before I hand it off to Ryan and Jordan to take us away. Please do use the question and answer panel for questions that you have. If you want to provide running commentary, send cat gifs, anything like that, please put that in the chat panel. And then also the first question that will be asked, are we going to share the recording? Yes, we will. Recording will be made available about 24 hours afterwards. You should have that in your inbox by lunchtime tomorrow. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ryan and Jordan to talk a lot about what the big challenges that we face as sales teams going into 2021. Gentlemen, take us away.
Awesome. Yeah, so I won't read off all of these challenges because we're going to dive deeper into them. I think, we're talking about the challenges in 2021. You may recognize several of these as challenges, relevant in 2020, in 2019. I think the shape of the problems changes, and the ways that we can solve them is really what's evolving. And instead of reading through all the different challenges that we're going to dig deeper into, I think the important thing, just to sort of set the stage, is all of these exist underneath an umbrella of aligning teams. You can see that this first problem that we're going to dig into, revenue teams exist in silos, is a theme of all of them, and what we really want to dig into and share what we've learned, what we're learning, but also from the group, learn from you all. Everybody here can contribute to this conversation.
Cool. So with that, we'll shift over into challenge number one. And as Ryan said, this kind of is part of the overarching theme of the entire thing, which is alignment between teams. And we're going to focus a lot today on alignment between sales and marketing. Everybody knows this. Revenue teams exist in silos. Sales and marketing tend to be two ships moving in generally the same direction, but with not a lot of communication between them. It's kind of to reinforce that. They're often misaligned. Only 6% of sales and marketing teams think they're well aligned in their revenue generation strategy. I actually personally think this is a terrible stat because I don't think there's a chance in the world that 1 in 4 revenue teams is extremely well aligned. Like, I just don't believe that it's 26%, and it actually says 44% for somewhat aligned. There's no way that that's true. I think if we actually did a deep dive into a lot of people who say we're very well aligned, there's gaps, there's things they're missing. They're very well aligned for the way they think their business needs to operate, but I think we need to move forward and align better. So I'm going to slide into the next one. So how do we actually align revenue teams, and what does that mean? We have, thinking of a way to say this, we have an easy alignment, right? There's a downstream one directional feedback loop that happens between marketing and sales, which it's really easy. Marketing generates leads, passes them down to sales, and sends them a bunch of information about how to convert this lead into an opportunity, how to handle this lead. Here's what they need to do. Now that part's super simple, right? We have a one directional feedback direct loop. It's not a loop. It's just, we're sending you information. Good luck from sales to marketing, or from marketing to sales. So the best way to align teams is create the bidirectional feedback loops. So how is sales actually informing marketing, and how are we giving them feedback on those leads? Now, I think a lot of companies, and probably most of the people in that 26 and 44%, are doing this in some sort of retroactive way. We're meeting at the end of every quarter to say, hey, like, here's all the leads you sent us. Here's what we did with them. Here's how well we did. Here's what we should change for the next 3 months. And that's not really a true bidirectional feedback loop because it's too slow. We're making changes that are happening 3 months after the fact, and we're not actioning things that we're learning in real time to actually inform our process and help us get better much more rapidly than if we're doing it 3 months after the fact. By the way, Richard, I can't see the chat, so if people are popping in questions, interrupt me.
I don't worry. We've got a few in there. I want you to get to the end of this before we do.
Cool. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, and it's really hard. I got to be honest. Creating bidirectional feedback loops is the core function of my job as a revenue operations leader, and there really needs to be somebody that owns this job at your company. It's very hard, and I want to start with what I think is a very simple version of a bidirectional feedback loop, and one that everybody can action right away. So just for an example, common objections. Your sales team is talking to people all day. Hopefully everybody's answering the phone still. Hopefully everybody's having just tons and tons of phone calls. I don't care if those phone calls are demo set. I don't care if those phone calls are, hey, we received 3 objections, or hey, they're on competitor A and B. There's valuable information in those phone calls that you should be actioning back. Common objections is a really good example of something that your sales team is experiencing daily that your marketing team probably has no insight into. But that information is extremely valuable for marketing, because if a sales reps are getting the same consistent common objections from the same leads, we want to communicate how we're handling that information back to marketing in a way that they can then tweak what they're marketing, tweak their messaging, tweak what they're doing, so that moving forward, leads that they're generating through, that objection's already been handled. We're handling that at the ad level. We're handling that at the content level. And that way, when it gets to sales, even if it is an objection, it's already been soft handled, and sales can quickly shut it down and move past it, right? But we're not doing that right now. So, Richard, you look like you had something.
No, I think this is a great point. I think right now we're just talking about sales and marketing, but this is also something for folks that are in solutions engineering and as you get further on.
Yeah.
If your solutions engineers are encountering something that maybe is a deal blocker or technical challenge, get ahead of that, bring that into the discovery process, work it even further up the funnel.
Yeah, totally. Think about it like, if you're sending me a bunch of leads and every one of those leads is saying, hey, you know what, I really like your product, but so-and-so's API integration with Salesforce is stronger, right? Sales is getting that constantly, and sales probably has 1,000 ways to answer it. There's one really good way that they're training their team on. Here's how we handle that objection. Here's how we crush that objection every single time, right? Send that up to marketing. And that could be the solutions engineers, that could be the sales team. Send that over to marketing and like, hey, our ads need to include this. We need to have some version of this that's polished and in our advertising and in our content and in everything that we're doing, because we don't want to have to handle this anymore. And we want to create more leads. Because if you're receiving it at the call level, that means some people aren't even converting because they're thinking it before they even convert, right? They're not even signing up for a demo. So, but this is one example. So I want to walk through the steps to actually do this, because it's important to not just say, hey, in theory, let's just send this back, right? There's a process here, and it's really simple. Identify your common objections. So you work with somebody like Ryan, say, Ryan, hey, you're on 46 sales calls a week. That's probably an understatement for Ryan, by the way. I think it's probably more like 50 to 70. You're on those. What are the three most common objections that you see for your marketing generated, right? Tell me the big three. Then, great. I'm going to go in and check all our call recordings. We use CAI here, our own product, Conversation Analytics. Most people are having some version of conversation intelligence. I highly recommend ours, little plug. But use your call recordings to find that objection. Where are we seeing this objection? How are reps handling it? And what are the ways that we're handling that are actually working to dispel this objection and move past it, right? And then automate the upstream communication. So we've now identified the objection. We've figured out a way to pull great responses to it. How do we send this to marketing in a way that isn't creating a ton of manual work and isn't going to be super retroactive? So the moment that a rep sees this objection or a sales engineer sees this objection, they're hitting a button. The response that they put in is triggered into Salesforce, and boom, our marketing team sees it, and then they can tweak their stuff as we go. It's pretty easy. We use Salesforce and HubSpot, right? Like everybody's using Salesforce, some version of that, or their CRM. Track this stuff in your CRM. And then actually action the communication. This is super important, because a lot of times, again, breaking down silos, you actually have to have somebody, this is where I come in, that works with both teams. I'm making sure sales is identifying the objections and putting these into Salesforce or whatever your communication system is. But then I'm actually making sure that marketing is going through and tweaking their ads and tweaking our content delivery to cater to this objection. Actually action it, and then iterate. The objections, this is never more important than it is in 2020. The objections that you saw in January were much different than the objections that you saw in April. And I promise you, you're going to have to iterate on this in 2021 the same way. It's going to be different. You're going to want to change very, very rapidly. And that's why it's important to automate this, because you can't do it 3 months after the fact. It's too late.
Jordan, a lot of good points here. Question, live question coming in. Where, as a RevOps leader, can you force this change? Can you force this sort of alignment, or do you really have to have sales and marketing want it, and you're the glue that holds it together?
You need, absolutely, you're definitely the glue that holds it together. You need executive influence to do this. This is not something that's going to happen. Like, I can't drive this by myself. At ringDNA, I'm fortunate we have a whole bunch of C-suite leaders who are very invested in revenue operations, and it obviously comes from the top down for us. Our CEO is very invested in making things like this happen. But you do need that executive investment, because at the end of the day, this is going to take a lot of buy-in from marketing, a lot of buy-in from sales, and there's some executives on those teams that are going to have a vested interest. Now, I promise you, if you paint them the picture of here's what we're going to do, we're going to take our common objections and our common competitors, and we're going to communicate that back to marketing so that they can tweak in real time as we go, they're going to love it. I can't imagine why they wouldn't, but you definitely need that executive buy-in.
I've got another thought on this, on the question. It's a good question, right? Can you force alignment? I don't think you can force anything. But I do have a belief that in general, even in their most dysfunctional states, sales and marketing, they desire alignment, and we all desire alignment. I think of it like, sales and marketing is a marriage, right? It's a relationship. And I think of like good RevOps leadership as bringing that together. Almost, I mean, you're going to cringe at this analogy, Jordan, but almost like a marriage counselor that is the glue that are bringing those two sides together, even when we're at odds with each other, right? We crave that alignment.
Yeah,
I think that the mediator or the group therapy coordinator, right? Those are a lot of terms that you hear thrown around.
Together, how I ended up from law into this role. So you just tie it together. Mediation. That's exactly it. It's interesting, right? Because it has to do with aligning goals, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the next point as well. But like this, you approach it from a point, you can't force it, obviously, but it helps align the goals in a way that this helps marketing create more opportunities. It helps us handle their leads in a better way and create better, more quality leads. And it helps sales be teed up to be more successful when those leads come through. So it's helping both sides achieve their goals so the ships are moving in the same direction. Cool. All right, so I'm going to move on to challenge number 2. Revenue teams are often, and this is teed up exactly from that, revenue teams are often focused on different goals and metrics. There's a horrifying statistic that I'm going to show you next that actually really bothers me and is something that we need to resolve very rapidly. Only 44% of companies have formally agreed on the definition of a qualified lead between sales and marketing. And that is, to me, incredible misalignment. If your two teams are moving in the same direction, you should at least know and have some agreed upon amount of here's what a qualified lead is at our company, right? Because otherwise, marketing is setting qualified lead goals that don't align with the actual revenue metrics that the sales team needs to generate. There's no way that those two things can be aligned unless you've agreed upon some of these shared definitions. So how do we align goals and metrics and standardize data collection? Agree on definitions and standardize data across departments. Here's what you do. It's really not that hard. Again, it takes a lot of executive buy-in. What are the marketing data points? You go to somebody like Scott, our head of demand gen, and you say, all right, what are the marketing data points? What are the marketing things that you're tracking that are super important to your goals? What are your KPIs? What are the goals that build into that? What does that all do? And then what are the definitions? Write them down for me. I want it all on a giant spreadsheet. Give it to me. Go to Ryan Valancourt. You say the same thing. Ryan, what are all the things that are important to you? Give me your definitions. And I'm going to take those 2 sheets and I'm going to compare them. There's going to be some overlap, and there's going to be a lot of definitions that don't line up. And that's super important to identify. And there's going to be a lot of things that are close, right? Like we might say that our qualified lead is very close to marketing qualified lead, but they might even use different nomenclature. So they might say, hey, we're tracking, SQOs and we're tracking SALs, and that's a wholly different thing, but that's not. Then develop consensus. And this is where it gets tricky, and this is where you need that executive buy-in. I need to have Ryan and Scott sit down in the same room with William and Howard and Cameron at our company and agree, here's what we're going to define a qualified opportunity as. Here's what we're going to define a qualified lead as. Here's an MQL. Here's an SAL. Here's our shared definition across all of these things that we have overlap in. Because if we're not talking about the same MQL, if marketing has a different MQL than sales, then it's like me describing an apple to you and you come in thinking about an orange. It's just not going to reverberate. And what I do communicate to you isn't going to make any sense. And then implement and expand. Again, this is one where identify the 10 most important metrics where you have overlap and agree upon definitions, and then iterate, because what metrics are important to you today, again, are going to be different in 2 months, and you're going to have more and more that you want to overlap. And as you create a standardized data alignment, more metrics can become more important that you need to identify. So I just put together a couple like low-hanging fruit ones where I would sort of start if I was doing this. MQL, SAL, SQO. If anybody's not familiar with those metrics, it's marketing qualified leads, sales accepted leads, and sales qualified opportunities. These are ones that we use at ringDNA. Bookings. Most companies, sales teams and revenue teams have some alignment on bookings. Marketing probably has like a totally different thing. They're like, yeah, we're using ARR. Like that doesn't line up. ARR and bookings are not the same thing, right? And we need that to line up because sales has the bookings goal, and I need a certain amount of bookings from marketing for sales to hit its bookings goal. And if marketing is saying, hey, we generated this much ARR, that's not the same thing. We're talking apples and oranges again. Competitors, objections, ideal customer profile. These are all super important for us to align on. We need to know what all these definitions are.
I want to reiterate something that Jordan went through, which is phenomenal. We hear a lot in modern sales in discussion. How do I get alignment between sales and marketing? And Jordan, while it's not sexy, just gave you a very pragmatic playbook of doing it. Get the data from marketing, get the data for sales, figure out what's similar, build some consensus, and then implement and expand that. And recognize that, much like in mediation, this is probably, and Jordan, you let me know because you've got more experience mediating, not everybody's going to be 100% happy with the definition. It's going to make marketing have to work a little bit harder. Sales isn't necessarily going to get everything they need in that definition, but that consensus lays the groundwork for some of these higher order operations that you can start to have happen here. That's a very, very important element there, Jordan.
Totally. Yeah. And there's the mediation reference is still spot on, because it's definitely requires some of that. And you're right. Like, nobody's going to come out of this totally happy with where everything landed. But I promise you, at the end of a quarter, when you go to line up your metrics and everybody's talking about the same bookings and the same qualified opportunities and the same SALs, everybody's gonna be a whole lot happier about the decisions they made along the way, because they made them with the same information that the other team was using. Cool. Ryan, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
Yeah, so this is a fun one. So when you start to create bidirectional feedback loops, and when you start to agree on these definitions, you put yourself in a position, in my view, to start to get a little bit more strategic about how sellers are prioritizing their time and who they're going after. Jordan, you can just hop right into the next one. So, right, this is, again, sticking with the sort of the sales and marketing alignment. It's the classic thing that, the sales says the leads suck, and marketing says that you don't respond fast enough, and your conversion rate is too low on those things. So one of the scenarios that we see a lot, real sort of status quo that I believe plays into both of these issues, including, by the way, sales teams being too slow to respond to good leads. I mean, marketing is right. The average B2B sales organization is not responding fast enough to hot inbound leads, and we don't need to cite all the stats out there about the relationship between speed to lead and conversion. But there are also a lot of leads that are maybe not your hottest inbound leads that the sales team is asked to call, and they don't deserve the same level of priority. But your average inside sales rep, if you're whether you're an SDR or you are a full cycle AE who's doing your own hunting, you show up in the morning. If you're like me, you show up in the garage, you throw your Zoom background on, and you figure out, who am I going to call, right? Who do I call? What sequence am I going to use? Like, what am I going to do today? And management, marketing, sales may have given you indication as to what leads are the most important to reach out to, or which prospects or accounts you should be targeting. But at the end of the day, it's really sort of left to me. Jordan, you can pop some of the bullets on here. Right. So one of the things that we're finding in the space that, like, revenue and sales leaders and reps themselves, frankly, are really hungry for, is systematizing a concept of priority to eliminate and remove that guesswork from the rep, right? The rep shouldn't be making that decision of who do I call first. It's our job as revenue leaders and ops leaders to kind of make that decision based on the data. What lead source, whether we're talking about different inbound leads, do we convert at the highest rate? And what sequences or what outbound strategies are converting at the highest rate, measured by your top performing sequences, or however you kind of organize your outbound strategy. And the key here is systematize, right? So it's thinking about, what are all the potential, like, types of leads or accounts, prospects I could be reaching out to. Establish a framework. I've got an example here, right? Number one, who should I call first? Who should I reach out to first? It's my P1s. It's my hot inbound leads. 5 minutes or less. That's religion, right? If I have somebody who's new, I don't care whether it's, it came in overnight or it's 4:30 and it just came in at 4:20. Put your reps in a position to always prioritize that. You'll make marketing happy. You'll make sales happy too, because we know those are going to convert at a really high rate. When I'm done with those, what do we move on to next? Maybe we're moving on to other MQLs that, where the lead meets, it's got a good lead score. We know it fits the ICP. It's not just any average content download. We get thousands of content downloads at ringDNA because our marketing team is really, really great with content, but we don't have our inbound SDR team who follows up on all those leads, prioritize them over our hot inbound leads. And we break down those content downloads based on information like ICP, lead score, et cetera. But once you go through those, then we go, if we're mixed, right, to our say our outbound prospecting. Maybe you're using intent data. Let's focus on accounts that are showing intent in our space before we kind of move more to coldish outbound. But again, the key is reps are trying to figure this out for themselves today. And what you want to do, systematize it, agree on it, make that decision for them. And whether you're using technology like ringDNA, we do some work that helps, helps you systematize this, but we're not the only tech that does that. You can use Salesforce for this, right? You can be smart about how you're creating simple list views and reports in Salesforce. Many ways to attack it, but the point is to build that system of priority.
And a question for both of you on this, and we've kind of hit on this a little bit of put systems in place, agree on definitions. It helps with alignment. It helps with prioritization. How frequently, and Jordan, let's start with you. How frequently are you revisiting some of the metric definitions that you set? And then Ryan, I'm going to ask about this component of like the prioritization. But Jordan, let's start with you.
Yeah. At ringDNA, we revisit them quite frequently, to be honest. We adjust our qualified opportunity definition from time to time. We adjust MQL, SA, all of those things to sort of accommodate what we're seeing in the market pretty consistently. And it's something a lot of times we don't adjust them, but we revisit the definition as a team very frequently. And we'll take a look at it, just make sure it still stands and that it still makes sense for the way that our business is operating currently. And so, I think it's something we probably talk about on about a monthly basis.
Monthly basis. How do you do that? Sorry, Ryan, before we go to you, Jordan, how do you do that without that becoming almost a distraction, right? Because I could feel like you're constantly iterating on metrics, reviewing metrics versus enacting change to improve them.
Yeah, the thing is for us, we review them and analyze them a lot. We don't change them that much. So it doesn't really become a distraction. It's something we talk about quite consistently, just make sure it still aligns. But when we do change them, we do it in a very systematic way that pushes out to the reps without, having a huge impact on our actual sales reps day-to-day workflow, or our marketing workflow. We do it in a way that, like Ryan, Scott, our C-suite execs, we work on it and push it out. But our reps, they're just showing up in their day and calling through the list that Ryan has prioritized for them. They don't really see a difference in that. In that way, we don't lose any velocity for our actual, lead gen, sales revenue generation, which is really important. Like that's actually a really good point to bring up, is do these things in a way that doesn't cost you 3 days of selling time.
Well, because that could be the concern, right? If you take this too far to the extreme, every quarter, maybe it's a new comp plan, a new account list, et cetera. So that's really good perspective to like change as much as you can behind the scenes. Reps come in and smile, dial, email, whatever.
Let them do the things that they actually want to do. They want to spend time doing those things.
Yeah, and I think Ryan, we can move on, because I think actually we're starting to talk about a little bit of this next concept of where reps are spending their time and how much it's not working.
Yeah. So this is something that we observe a lot, and I think I think all of us in the space have benefited tremendously from an absolute explosion of sales tools over the past 10 years. Our technology, especially for driving productivity, in top of funnel in prospecting, it's where a lot of the technology is. It's so good. There's so much competition. It's driving innovation throughout the space. We're getting better tech. We're getting it like for better prices. But a funny thing has happened along the way, which is a lot of the technology has been oriented around like crazy empowerment of the individual end user to be their own mini prospecting CEO. But here's the sort of, I don't know if it's a secret, but here's the reality. Your average salesperson is like getting out of sales after 18 months. Your average salesperson, doesn't actually make quota. The stats on it are pretty scary. It isn't working, right? We can train and we can make these people that we bring into sales great on the phone, teach them sales process, teach them follow, teach them absolutely how to hunt and prospect, right? I'm not saying we should remove agency or creativity from sellers, but we got to understand that creating a smart process and systematizing that, that's leadership's responsibility. We've got to put them in a position to actually win. You know, your seller shows up every day again, and they're like, who should I call? What sequence should I put them in? You know, well, like, what should I say? Why didn't this sync to Salesforce? 38 minutes later, they're down a rabbit hole trying to figure that out. They're not just a mini prospecting CEO. A lot of sellers are functioning almost like mini sales ops, rev ops sort of staffers. And that's not what we hired them to do. So what we want to think about is how do we put them in a position to execute, right? We want to be coaches, they're players, right? Jordan, you can pop the bullets here, right? So what does this mean? Like key takeaways. It's the business's responsibility, and this is actually going to relate to, I saw a question from Eve that I want to get to around, you know, how do you build good cross-functional relationships? One of the best ways to build good cross-functional relationships between sales and marketing is have personnel on both sides part of a committee, essentially, that is thinking about the content that we arm our sales reps with to go to market with in our sequence emails, et cetera. And again, I'm not saying you remove total agency and creativity from sellers. Get feedback from them. Let your best sellers, your best prospectors write some of the email content and sort of get it up there. But leadership, we believe, should be accountable to and responsible ultimately to what that go-to-market strategy is. And again, building the process that puts those sellers in a position to be successful. So that's arming them with good email campaigns targeted by persona and by industry. It's simple things, right? Give them a phone script, right? And, you know, in a more transactional sale, that's going to be literally a script. Like, here are the things you should say in your cold call. In a more consultative sale, maybe you're not giving a script, but give good open-ended questions, for example, discovery questions that are calibrated to the persona that you're calling if you sell to different personas, or that are calibrated with the right jargon and industry language to the you know, the industry of the person that you're talking to if you sell to multiple different industries, right? And then again, collect feedback from the folks on the front lines, but don't make it the salesperson's job to come up with the content, to try to operationalize a process, because you're going to end up in a place where, you know, 10% of your team is going to be top performers and everybody else is not going to make it because they're spending half of their time doing a job that they're not great at, right? And I just to follow up on one of those points, as I mentioned, Eve, that's one thing that I've noticed at ringDNA being really helpful for the cross-functional relationships between sales and marketing. It's involving, you know, both teams in the work done to equip the team with these resources. And one other thing, this is a little bit of a teaser to something that we're getting to, you know, marketing has the same level of expectation, our business, to be listening to call recordings, right? And to be looking at the data with the sales team around what's working in the outreach.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's a point that I think I really want to drive home on how to create good relationships. Marketing and sales tend to have a bit of an abrasive relationships, I think, in a lot of organizations because everything is very retroactive. So what that means is over the course of a quarter, a sales team is sitting and receiving a bunch of leads from marketing. And for 3 months, they're thinking to themselves, these leads are crap. Our marketing team sucks. They're not doing better. They're not doing anything, but they're not actually communicating any feedback to marketing, right? And marketing is thinking, oh, we're doing great. We're doing great. We're doing great. And then they hit the last month of the quarter and sales dumps 40 pages of feedback to them. And marketing's like, shit, we missed our number because we didn't know any of this information. And sales just totally threw us under the bus, which I think is pretty common. And that's where, at the risk of beating a dead horse, the bidirectional automated feedback loops of we're giving this stuff to marketing in real time so that they can iterate and get better. It both eliminates the fact that sales is sitting there thinking this for 3 months because they've communicated that feedback. They feel good about it. And marketing now knows it in real time. So they're not going to get thrown in the bus at the end of the quarter. They're actually going to iterate and expand in real time and improve the problem before it ever actually destroys that relationship.
Well, and to use a sales analogy here, it's like, you know, being really good at discovery and closing lost an opportunity early. Like, hey, marketing, we're not going to get what we need from you. I'd rather have that in the month 1 of the first quarter of the year and be able to make mitigations versus being in the board meeting being like, the leads were bad, but
yeah,
I got a team of hunters. Like, we're great over here.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time you find out that the leads were bad is in front of the board.
It never happens. Never happens.
Yeah, this is another fun one too. So when you start to build your bidirectional feedback loops between sales and marketing, and I'm going to stay in the theme here of like sort of the top of the funnel prospecting and building pipeline. Something that we've noticed is a missed opportunity to capitalize on what we call micro wins, right? We know that everybody is struggling with, and everybody's trying to get better at and to master prospecting, to fill the pipe with better, more qualified opportunities. And so what is the salesperson, constantly thinking about doing? What is their main goal? Like I'm emailing, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm making phone calls because I'm trying to book the meeting. I'm trying to get you to agree to get into usually a discovery meeting so we can sort of qualify that and get into a cycle. One of the things, and Jordan, you can move on, that I mentioned my journalism background that has helped me a lot actually in sales, is to think about the sales process as a research project, right? Every interaction you have in sort of the top and even mid funnel, right? It's about information gathering, right? It's not just like, great, yeah, sure, we want to book the meeting, but what other information can we confirm and can we gather in a cold call, right? Or in an email exchange about a person and or about an account that can really shift our prospecting strategy into the account. So I'm going to give you an example of something that we do at ringDNA, and you can extrapolate that, into into a range of other potential use cases, right? Like just like every other inside sales org, our sellers, both our SDRs and our AEs who are full cycle, they do their own hunting as well. They're on the phone, they're email, they're trying to book a meeting, right? But what we say is like, if you can't book a meeting, if you can identify who the prospect account uses as an incumbent provider, that's incredibly valuable information. And we want to celebrate that as a little bit of a win, right? So how do we train them to get that information, and what do we do with it? It's really, really simple stuff. Like in our dialer, we have a disposition called prospecting competitor ID'd. So we've got meeting set right here, and right underneath it is prospecting competitor ID'd. It's a reminder that this is a decent result or a potential result. So when we get that information, we're doing reporting on it, who's actually identifying this information, and we make it easy for them to update who that competitor is within Salesforce. And here's where the magic starts to happen around the bidirectional feedback loops. When we update that field, when the seller updates that field, we make it really easy for them to do that. That is a signal that goes back to marketing. And if that account is in a target list for marketing, immediately and automatically, that's pivoting how they're doing outreach to that account. Because we may already be targeting them with LinkedIn ads or, sort of different drips that are happening in the marketing platform. We've got language and value prop that shifts once we know what competitor you use. And it's not to name the competitor. That's not it. It's just we've done research and we know what problems you may face if you use, say, competitor X. Whereas before, our outreach was a little bit generic, right? So this is both about celebrating micro wins, but showing how gathering information like that as a micro win can really meaningfully make that outreach process smarter with a bidirectional feedback loop.
And I think it's a great opportunity too, with to really strengthen the relationship there too. Like, oh, okay, this seems like we need a white paper, a piece of content on whatever, because we're being depositioned, or we're finding this incumbent has just released that that feature set. Seems like that's another aspect of that loop that just keeps looping.
Yeah,
Amen.
Totally. And you get the other added benefit, which is right now your sellers come in, they make 40, 50 calls a day. They maybe book one meeting, and they leave thinking, oh man, that was a tough day, right? Didn't have a great day. I only booked one meeting. But your seller comes in, makes 40 calls, books one meeting, identifies competitors at 8 different accounts. That's a pretty good day. Like we've done a lot. We've moved the needle on a lot of accounts. It's really going to help them in the future for both sales and marketing, right? And by celebrating the micro wins, that rep ends their day in a much more positive way, which, let's be honest, super important that we help reps celebrate these things and actually, feel good about the work they're doing, because it's a tough job.
No, I think there's a lot there, and I do want us to make sure we have time to get to everything. So we've touched a little bit on conversation intelligence, call recording, and all of that. And I know that's kind of where we're headed next. So yeah, here we go.
Yeah, this is like an age-old problem that I think part of the reason we put it here when we're thinking about big problems in 2021, right? Managers are too busy to listen to conversations. Look, if you make meaningful progress in everything that we've talked about before, right? In as it relates to sales and marketing alignment, agreeing on definitions, coming up with a concept of priority, creating bidirectional feedback loops, right? Or if you haven't done those things, like focus there. But once you have, the next thing is to, if your business isn't currently recording and using AI to automate a little bit of the work of business intelligence and call coaching, I mean, it's really the next thing that you need to look at. The technology for this, we do it, but we're not the only ones, right? We're all benefiting, as I said before, from a rich marketplace of companies who are acknowledging that we need the data around actual conversations, not just your typical, behavioral and quantitative metrics, as important as those are, right? So if your business right now identifies with the problem of like, I don't have time to listen to sales calls because nobody has time for everything. Well, that's part of the value prop of something like conversation AI and this technology, right? How do we automatically flag? And Jordan mentioned this before. If we go back to that example of like competitors and bidirectional feedback loop, like subscribe your key marketing personnel to automatic notifications when a seller has a conversation dealing with competitor A or B, right? It's sort of, it's doing that work for the group, right? And this is, I would say, the most instrumental and critical, kind of technology for bidirectional feedback loops. It's absolutely essential, especially in this age where sales teams are still almost entirely remote. We know how many calls they're making. We know what those dispositions are. We've got those behavioral metrics, but what's actually happening in the call? If you're not there yet, I'd make it like priority number one in 2021.
And if you want a gold star on this, think about how that also gets back to your product team that doesn't want or care to sit on 50, 60, 70, 1,000 sales calls. It's a huge unsung benefit of conversation intelligence.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Huge point, Richard. That is 100% spot on. I think conversation AI is the most underutilized or improperly utilized tool on the marketplace right now. I think it's at like phase one where everybody's like, it's great, I'm coaching reps, I'm doing great things with it. But there's so much more. There's so much more low-hanging fruit and meat on that you can push out to products, marketing, CS even. Your CS team should be using this, listening to calls before they do an implementation to hear from the customer themselves what was important in that implementation. There's so much to do here.
Yeah, I think conversation AI and that entire space, I think it's the shiniest object on the block, and I think that's why everybody's got it. But I think very few organizations are doing it really at that like black belt, true expert level.
Totally.
Yeah, and this is the last one. So if I mention, like, if it's my belief that, if you're not using a conversation intelligence type tool, right, and you're not capturing that critical data set in your feedback loops, making for a better sales process, make that the focus. The technology in the space, it's so good and so helpful. The next frontier in this space, for those of you who maybe already are using conversation intelligence type technology, like what ringDNA does or some others, this is really where we think the space is going to be not just in reactive coaching, where we're evaluating call recordings and we're using tech to automatically flag coachable moments, which is really, really helpful to give timely but still reactive feedback. The frontier in this is real-time enablement. Right? How do we provide coaching? How do we use AI and technology to give the kind of coaching that we would do after the fact in real time? This is a really big thing that we're focused on at ringDNA right now with our product. But again, it's not just ringDNA. We anticipate a lot of companies and technology companies basically going here. So just a couple examples, right? Like, any company who is, if you're fielding inbound calls, for example, you got a sales line. How can we do things like dynamically show our sales rep picking up the phone, what was the marketing source? What was the lead source of that? And can we automatically pop a dynamic script for our seller based on what we know about where that lead came from, right? Questions like this, right? And then, as I mentioned, the next frontier, which is really here, And this is some exciting stuff. Like, Jordan talked about objection handling, and the sales team, hey, we train how to overcome objection A and B, right? And we've tested this by listening to conversations. That's why we train to it. Can we detect in live conversations that somebody is throwing objection A and then pop a screen pop for the seller to remind them of that messaging that we train? So I'd say this is a little bit more forward-looking, next frontier stuff, but if you feel like you're doing a good job on, items 1 through 6, this is the next step.
And I think that's something too. You can see there's tools that are starting to roll out features like this. There's also more in the service desk space. If you think of the organizations that have really, really high volume support businesses, your GoDaddies of the world, your Squarespaces of the world, there's starting to be a little bit of this in a very, very specific applied sense to coach thousands of support reps up. Certainly something we've seen also a lot of conversations on in MSP.
Yeah, Richard, it's a good point. Like, and I'll just make one more point about it, because you're right to identify that sort of high volume contact center type businesses are the, I would say, the earliest to adopt this kind of tech. But, at ringDNA, we've got a 20 odd, person sales team, much more consultative type sale. We're using this to do things like, we teach a listening technique to our account executives, right? And that listening technique involves using language like, it sounds like, it seems like, I'm hearing, right? It's a way to make sure we're really keyed in and listening in our discovery. And if one of our account executives goes a certain period of time, it's about 4 minutes, in a sales conversation, and they haven't used that language that we teach, we just pop them a little reminder and essentially says, shut up and listen, right? So there are ways to use this, right? It also in more of a consultative sale.
Yeah, I think this is exciting. I mean, I think that this really starts to become the next iteration of, we've talked, and I think John in the comment section had mentioned, like, hey, are we trapped in this new technology prison? Like, this is the new way of this cool intersection between real-time coaching and also kind of having that fit in the sales process with a bunch of data that comes before the conversation, context during, and then prescriptive guidance for afterwards. Pretty exciting stuff here. Folks, we've got a few minutes left, so we're going to actually jump into some questions here. And we've got Jordan and Ryan here just till the top of the hour. First, and we've touched on this just a little bit, but actually, Ryan, I want you to double click a little bit more into this. This is Eve's question in the Q&A panel here, where talking about, for those folks who can't see it, it matters a lot to continuously build really strong cross-functional relationships in any organization, with marketing and sales being extra important. How do you kind of keep it going? How do you keep that relationship being successful and continue to build a really strong relationship?
I mean, it's like the question of our time, right? Because this isn't just about building good cross-functional relationships for the purpose of like optimizing your, the revenue operation. I think that question also gets at what everybody is dealing with in, COVID 2020, social isolation. Everybody's at home, so we miss being together in person. So I think, I gave some tactical examples before specific to sales and marketing, like, actually have something like a committee that involves members from both teams to regularly meet and evaluate the performance of sequences, and specifically the content that those teams collaborate on. We have a committee. It's not really a content committee. We call it a go-to-market committee. It involves not just sales and marketing. It involves some folks in our executive group too. When we're launching new plays, targeting different industries, et cetera, like it's sort of a team effort. And what happens is everybody is invested in the success of that. And when it's not successful, and it's not always successful, we're also sharing in the lack of that. And it's not finger pointing, because we were all involved in the initial construction of what the actual strategy was. So that's sort of a practical thing that builds those relationships. Beyond that, I think, look, everybody's looking for answers for building better, good human relationships right now, like being virtual and being remote. I'll just say one of the things that we've done and we've gotten a lot of value from is As a company, we're doing far more frequent all hands meetings, aligning the rest of the company on everything that we're doing strategically at the highest level. It's run and prepared and almost entirely executed by our CEO. So those used to be, quarterly to biannual. We're doing them monthly now. Right. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, we've got some folks in the company who are really, really focused on internal community building separate from the business piece. And I think that's really intentional. It's creating spaces for conversations that are actually not about the work that we do every day, but it's about relationship building. Eve, if you want to dig into that, it's something I'm really interested in. Happy to carve some time out, separately and share a little bit more in detail what we're doing.
And I think that's a common theme we've heard throughout, that when you kind of layer on the madness of the pandemic with some of the just inherent challenges of building a revenue org or scaling a revenue org, creating a space for the organization to also come up with new ideas and listening back to your employees and saying, hey, we're going to win or lose in this time as one. It's not sales ran the play poorly or the play was written badly. It's like, no, we failed because we didn't hit our ARR goal for the play or whatever it might be. I'm going to throw this one out there. This is probably a pretty quick one, and then we'll wrap up. This is a question from Connor. And Connor was just, when we were chatting about sales development reps before, have you seen, and Jordan, let's start with you on this one. Have you seen organizations that use researchers that really make sure that the leads that the SDRs are calling into or engaging with are really like high quality, and the SDRs are just focused on like appointment setting and selling versus some of the research or other aspects? Back to that prospecting point.
Yeah, so I've worked with that in the past. It's not exactly what we do at ringDNA. At ringDNA, we do a bit of it's not so different of a process. We do a bunch of research on the back end. It's part of our initiative that Ryan talked about, which is sort of taking some of that decision making about who to prospect and who to reach out to out of the hands of sales reps and putting it in the hands of leadership. So we work with the marketing team cross-functionally to pull lists ourselves and actually like identify who we're going to reach out to and do that research on the back end. Like I actually personally do some of that research as well. And then we create those and push them that way. It's been effective. It goes to supporting sort of what Ryan mentioned earlier, which is taking the decision-making, making sure that sales reps don't feel like they have to be the CEO of their own, every bit of it. They're not their own sales ops person. You're taking that off their plate, which is extremely valuable. I haven't seen, to be honest, like hiring a whole team of just researchers who are doing that and then funneling to SDRs and then AEs. I haven't seen that, so I can't speak to it specifically. But I think it would work. I don't know. Sure.
Yeah. It feels like there's a certain industry where that would make maybe a ton of sense. And then there's other industries where it would just, the economics wouldn't work out.
The only reason it scares me a little bit is that I really like here that I work with like Ryan and Scott and some of our senior people to identify these, because it's a lot of people with a lot of experience selling, right? They know who we should be reaching out to, who the good targets are and stuff. In my mind, if I'm hiring a team of researchers who are like literally pulling contacts and doing that stuff, I'm probably getting a team of relatively junior people that are inexperienced. And I would want to coach really, really heavily on making sure that they're pulling the right people and doing the right things. So I'm not sending my SDRs down a bad rabbit hole. But sure, might work.
Yeah, and we just got actually somebody in the chat panel was just like, yeah, they do that when the data is not readily available, right? Yeah. And you need to selling into, like we were saying before, a specific vertical.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That makes when you have a narrow lane, that makes so much sense.
I feel like we could keep this conversation going for hours. I think there was a bunch of fun stats in there that we just like, hold on, that feels really high. Like, what do you mean they're spending 60%, 66% of their time not selling? Like, really? But we are at time. Jordan, Ryan, I know you're both incredibly busy. It's December in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of revenue goals that we're all trying to hit. I really appreciate you taking some time and sharing your expertise. On behalf of all the members in the community, the folks that joined in live today, Gina and the team behind the scenes, I do want to thank you both. Wish you very, very safe and successful rest of your quarter and an amazing, amazing rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Just really, really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
Thank you. Thank you so much, y'all. We'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot.